Side. He got it. Touchdown.
All right. Welcome in Toilets to Titles, Now About Them Cowboys, episode number 4. We are joined by special guest of DallasCowboys.com. I referred to him as a master of all trades. He's a TV host. He's a reporter, post-game, play-by-play. He's hosting Talkin Cowboys. He's hosting the draft show. That is Kyle Youmans. Kyle, how are we doing this evening?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for having me. And, I mean, you know this as much as anybody else that's listening out there, but there's no such thing as a quiet offseason with the Cowboys. So it's still kicking up dust and trying to continue to grind away.
Man, I feel like this offseason has been, we'll get to this, but it has been one where it seems like there is a different level of urgency. It always seems like there was a hot ticket item rolling into every offseason, like something they can sell at training camp. And I heard you guys mention it the other day. I think Brian mentioned, look for a signing around training camp, maybe CeeDee Lamb or look, they like to have something to debut at training camp. And this offseason, it hasn't felt like it's been for show. It feels like it's for production. And look at what the Eagles did last year. And we're diving right in right now. The Eagles, they went out and they paid the tax, man. But you bring in a guy like A.J. Brown and you bring a guy like Hassan Reddick, and those guys really showed out. Darius Slay, James Bradbury, they all showed out. And the Cowboys, they saw that up close and personal. So this offseason, I feel like there's definitely been another level of go get it.
Yeah. I think that's really the biggest change, because you're right. If you're a fan of the Cowboys and you've been around the last 5 to 10 years, you can almost script the entire offseason before it really gets even started. You could you could say, okay, first week's going to be a little bit scarce in terms of the signings. You don't necessarily have the news breaking. And then week 2, things really pick up and they're going to get these guys that are still productive and still talented, but they're going to be the back end guys in terms of these contracts and try and save a little bit of cash on the cap or whatever it may be. That was the script. They went off script, which is, I think, been a welcome sight for Cowboys Nation. They go out and they trade a couple picks for Stephon Gilmore. You get a starting caliber cornerback right now to pair with Trayvon Diggs and kind of mix in there with a young cornerback group with guys like Deron Bland and Nashawn Wright. And then you also turn around and you make the trade for Brandon Cooks as well, and you get a starting caliber wide receiver that allows Michael Gallup not to have to live up to a number 2, because last year he was a below average number 2. Now he can be a solid, if not very well above average number 3, while Brandon Cooks is your above average and solid number 2. So I think the production and the way that they filled out this roster this year has been different. But it's been a welcome sight for the Cowboys, and it's something that I think puts them in a good position going into the draft process and these 30 visits that are coming up next week. And a lot of what is still to look forward to is going to be even more exciting, knowing that they've taken care of a couple of those spots.
Man, you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned like the last 5 years. You could basically script what you believe the Cowboys are going to do in the offseason. And I like to read the tea leaves. So, there's people I listen to. You've become, ever since you came on board, you got a good grip. Brian's got a good grip. I listen to Dane Brugler. He's got a good grip. Bobby Belt has a good grip. And you guys don't always flat out say it. But if you listen closely, you can connect the dots and you can get an idea of what the Cowboys are doing. And I mean, last year, Tyler Smith, the morning of the draft, I don't remember who exactly was talking about it, but in the circle of Cowboys analysts that I respect and I listen to, name was dropped.
Yeah.
And then not only, Tyler Smith, pre-Tyler Smith, Sam Williams. Everyone was talking up Sam Williams, and that was a target in the second round. So, yeah, if you listen closely, if you follow closely, you could almost predict based upon knowledge you've been given. But this offseason, unpredictable. I mean, Cooks, we talked about this earlier in the first episode. OBJ, DeAndre Hopkins, Cooks, like there was a circle of targets. Cooks made the most sense based upon the fact it was going to be cheaper, and the Cowboys were interested last year. So, and ultimately ended up being the case. But we're going to dive into all this. There's been a few things very exciting, but I do want to mention, I heard you on the draft show. You haven't been able to do your taxes yet because you've been so. I know you guys are sponsored. You have a tax sponsor. So, why have you been so busy? What have you been working on over at DallasCowboys.com?
Oh man, it's been a couple different things. I mean, from a life standpoint, things are very busy. I'm getting married in May. My beautiful fiance, Lorena, is keeping me busy, and we've been doing a lot of really cool stuff for that. It's been a blast. I had my bachelor party last week, so that was also a week of work that normally I'll have kind of taken care of by the time the draft comes around, but it was able to kind of push it all back and have a good time and had an absolute blast with some of my best friends from different walks of life, which was really, really cool. But in terms of a work schedule, I've been doing plenty of draft prep. I just wrapped up the draft magazine, the Dallas Cowboys Star magazine draft guide that is going to be released this week. I think you can actually pre-order it, and I think you can get it on shelves as soon as tomorrow.
Did someone guess the five players?
Yeah, they did. They did guess the 5 players, and I'm waiting for them to release the cover to finally do it. But I had 5 winners.
Yeah,
I've notified all of them, but I told them to hang tight for a little bit. But yeah, somebody guessed the 5 players. We have 5 players on the front. All of them have Texas ties, either with their collegiate career or their high school career. So it's a really, really cool cover. Very colorful. Couple big time programs on there that are going to be really exciting. But even more exciting, we have a mock draft. We have inside feature stories. We've got scouting reports on 132 different players, and then complete position rankings all the way through there too. So that was a lot of work. I've actually put together a little bit of the math, and I wrote 30,000 words for this magazine, which that's not my number one goal at DallasCowboys.com or my number one job description. I'm more of a host and more of an analyst than I am a writer, but I do contribute from a writing standpoint sometimes with the website. And then especially around draft time, I start putting out some really cool stuff. And starting this week, I'll start having a weekly column on the draft and on what is happening inside the building, because I'm going to get a chance to sit down with all the 30 visits and really, really dive in to what the prospects are that the Cowboys are looking at and who they are as people and as prospects, not only with the film, but pairing that a little bit as well. So it's been busy. That paired with a lot of college basketball has been a ton of fun, but I wouldn't trade it for the world.
To me, and I'm sure you could agree, but I'll let you speak for yourself. This is my favorite time of year because when the season starts, I'm such a Cowboys fan. Like football, like I'm so wrapped up, like anxious, and I live and die. Like Monday, I go into work. I live in New York. We found that out. You're on Central Time, I'm on Eastern Time. Yeah. So there's a little bit, but I'm sure you're not used to talking to Cowboys fans from New York, but we're all over the world, man. Yeah. We got a guy at Campy who's not here this evening down in Australia. So imagine trying to work that schedule out. Yeah. But man, it's the best time of year because it's the season of optimism, and hope, and it really keeps you going. It fills up the bucket. Right. So that in the regular season, you can get through the trial and tribulations. I do have to mention, we have Ultra Cowboy here in the chat this evening. And he said, if he was in the mob, I don't know what this means. I don't know. He said he'd vouch for you. So whatever, if you ever need somebody who from the mob, who could vouch for you, Ultra Cowboy is it. But speaking of interviews, you're talking about, the 30-day visits. I got to interview Cody Mauch at the Senior Bowl. Yeah. I don't know if he's going to be a 30-day, but excellent guy. Tajay Spears has been on the channel before. So we're like huge Tulane fans. Nick Anderson, we had a few of them on the show this year. And we got to watch Tulane, I know this is a Cowboy show, but Tulane, what a season they had, man. But you don't have seasons like that without electrifying, like once in a, in a, like, I don't know, in a span of a college career, right? Like for fans, Tulane fans, how often have they seen a team play like that? They beat USC in a bowl game. So
Yeah.
I hope Tajay gets a chance to come down.
Well, and that's the thing about Tulane specifically, and I actually got to keep a close eye on them for a couple of reasons. The first reason is they're in the American Athletic Conference, and one of the teams that I cover, my North Texas Mean Green, are making the jump to the American next year. So I kind of kept a close eye on a couple of those schools along the way. But the second reason is I went to that Cotton Bowl game. I was there for Tulane and USC, and I remember looking at Tajay Spears and saying, my goodness, he's even more electrifying in person. I mean, he can really turn it on and flip a switch, and he's just a big play waiting to happen. And then I was really impressed because I hadn't watched close enough to really look at Dorian Williams, the linebacker at the second level, up until that point. And I mean, every time I looked up, number 2 was making a tackle.
Mm-hmm.
Something was happening along the way for that Tulane defense. That was really, really impressive. So, yeah, I'm right there with you. I thought the Green Wave had a phenomenal season. And like you said, it takes those generational and those program-changing type of players to have a 10-win turnaround in 1 year, going from 2 and 10 to whatever they ended up being. I think it was 12 and 2, I think is what it was. But it was just an incredible thing to watch. And the way that they did it on both sides of the ball was impressive. And you could see it on the film too. I think there's a couple more Tulane guys that aren't done yet. They're going to be in that draft class next year too. And we're going to be right back here talking about it next April as well.
Yeah. Heck yeah. And Tajay, I know you weren't at the Senior Bowl, man, but every day he was like end zone, like untouched, man. I forget there was a Georgia safety. I can't think of his name at the top of my head, but met him like at the second level head on, and Tajay just dropped his jock strap. He was like just completely lost, just gone.
Yeah. It was Christopher Smith, right? That was who came up and got to him. And I remember watching that on the All 22, but he just went straight. And that's kind of one of the things about Jay Spears that was a knock against his game, was his physicality, but he didn't need the physicality in the American. He didn't have Georgia safeties stepping up and trying to hit him in the chin. No, he would go around everybody in the American, but the fact that he was able to run through Christopher Smith, who's a pretty darn good safety too. I have him ranked as my 6th best safety. He's a top 100 player in my opinion. I think that's something to keep an eye on, just in the fact that Tajay Spears was able to show out like he did in Mobile.
Yeah, definitely. All right, however you're listening to the show, if you are watching us on YouTube, it'd be greatly appreciated. Hit the like button, throw us a subscribe. We're at 981 subs right now. We are slowly inching towards 1,000, man. We are right on the cusp. That is the first milestone in our content. Toiletsandtitles.com. We have, I want to say, about 90 or so player profiles. You want to catch them, you can see my cornerback rankings and some other players that I'm sure we're going to dive into. But Kyle, we can't look too far ahead without looking back. Let's start off this offseason. Kellen Moore's gone, Dalton Schultz gone, Connor McGovern's gone, and then Ezekiel Elliott, who I think he's going to end up back in Dallas. Just thought. Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you say bold, it makes me feel like that's not. I'm wrong. I'm wrong. But I just don't see him anywhere else. And I thought Cincinnati. And that was before, there was rumors about Cincinnati. Just made sense. Ohio kid, Cincinnati's close. Samaje Perine gone. Joe Mixon's in a little bit of trouble. Ezekiel Elliott's a veteran, hard worker. He's going to do all the dirty work. So Cincinnati makes sense. But I also feel like coming back to Dallas, playing with Dak, taking a lesser deal also might make sense. But it depends on the draft. But those names, I might have missed a few names. What do you feel was the biggest loss the Cowboys had this offseason?
Man, it's tough. I think the continuity on the offensive side of the football, a lot of people are looking at it as a positive, to where Kellen Moore wasn't helping this offense. But I think there is a level of intrigue in what's going to happen on that side of the ball, because I think Kellen Moore's a good offensive coordinator. Was he right for this personnel? Was he right for this current situation in Dallas? Probably not. Will he go and succeed in Los Angeles? I think he's actually a better fit with the Chargers than he is with the Cowboys. But I think that's going to be that'll be a learning curve for the most part, especially with Mike McCarthy taking over as a play caller for the first time since 2018. It will be a different look for this offensive side. So I think if you're talking about most impactful departure, that's the best way to put it. I'm not going to say it's a massive loss for the Cowboys to lose Kellen Moore. I really do think he did a good job here. I think he was a solid coordinator. Can they improve upon what he was doing? Absolutely. And I think that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. I think an underrated departure is Connor McGovern. His versatility was valued up front for this coaching staff. They really liked the fact that he was durable. He fought through injury. He played well through injury for the most part throughout the season. And I know his film wasn't as solidified as the other guard position at Zach Martin.
Yeah.
But Cowboys fans are pretty spoiled, and for a good reason, at the offensive line spot, because they have had Tyron Smith when healthy.
Right.
They have had Travis Frederick and Zach Martin. And then even
Chaz
now,
Green.
Tyler Biotish has been playing solid. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's multiple linemen. You go all the way back to the 90s line.
That was a joke. I threw in Chaz Green.
Yeah,
who got bodied in Atlanta.
Yeah, he did. Oh, my gosh. That game still haunts Dak Prescott.
Oh, my goodness.
But that's the thing is you have so many of these offensive linemen that you've seen in the past that are just dominant.
Mm-hmm.
But solid offensive linemen, especially in this day and age of the NFL, they don't grow on trees. They're tough to come by, and that's why teams in the draft invest so much capital in the first and second rounds of drafting really good starting caliber offensive linemen. Like you said, with Cody Mauch at North Dakota State, he's got some versatility. Is he a guard? Is he a tackle? He probably fits at both to a certain extent. He's got some lacks at both to a certain extent. So I'm interested to see what they do to replace McGovern. Do they draft somebody at 26? There's probably two names there that are worth being at 26 because it's not a very good class of guards, and that's Osiris Torrance and Steve Avila. And they like both of those guys, at least from what I've heard to this point. But are they over the moon about them? Probably not. There's other prospects in this draft that they are a little bit more infatuated with than the Torrances and the Avilas of the world. So I think that's probably the biggest loss right now. Everything else you've either traded and filled the role for the most part, and you've been able to retain some really good guys. Dalton Schultz is probably another one. You want a high-end tight end, but I don't think he was necessarily a game changer either. I'd probably put the departure of Connor McGovern over Dalton Schultz.
You know what? I didn't mention Noah Brown. And now that you mentioned Dalton Schultz, and we were talking earlier, about Michael Gallup easing into the number 3 role with Noah Brown gone and with Dalton Schultz gone. Noah Brown was the blocking wide receiver. Mm-hmm. Dalton Schultz was the pass catching tight end. I just hope if we do go tight end, we merge the two. So now instead of having to rotate the two players, we find somebody who can do both. And I think I was on your show also where I think it was Brian mentioning someone in the Cowboys organization like Hendershot more than Ferguson. Yeah. And to me, Hendershot's a stretcher. So he's not that blocking guy either. He's the athlete. So I'm hoping that they can get a guy who can do both. And I do enjoy how they rotate their tight ends. And it seemed like they enjoyed it as well. It brought like a level of fun to the game, but there's something that can be said. And I think Mike McCarthy might be more like what I'm describing in a guy who would enjoy having a guy who can do both, keep him on the field every time. You don't know if we're running, you don't know if we're passing, but if we are running, my tight end is going to put his finger in the dirt and then he's going to put his hands through your chest. And I think that would be helpful. But with Kellen Moore gone, I liked Kellen Moore and I doubted him and I doubted CeeDee Lamb going into this year. With Amari Cooper gone, I didn't believe he could call an offense that would have a guy like CeeDee Lamb targeted as much as a guy like CeeDee Lamb should be. In the first 3 weeks were a little nerve-wracking. I thought I was correct. And then down the stretch, they both completely proved me wrong. But I think the nail in the coffin for Kellen Moore was when we would have rhythm, it just always seemed like he would just call a play that would set us back. Yeah. It set us back like 7-8 yards, and it would just kill momentum. I would love for them. Mark Sanchez, I feel like Dak had his best years. I know Mark Sanchez isn't looking to come be an offensive coordinator. John Kitna, Mark Sanchez, like when those guys were around, Dak Prescott was just through the roof. So we'll see how it looks with Brian Schottenheimer and with Mike McCarthy. But now we have returning assets, right? Dan Quinn, I thought he was gone last year. I thought it was a bonus getting him back. He's back. Malik Hooker comes back, and he's not just excited. Jaron Kurtz, the new number 0. And then you have I said Malik Hooker's back. I'm wrong. Donovan Wilson. I apologize. I'm mixing up our safeties.
Well, they're all back. So you're right.
Yeah. In a sense.
They're all there.
In a sense. Yeah. So we bring Donovan Wilson back. All 3 safeties are excited. Leighton Vander Esch and Jonathan Hankins. So I'm happy with all this, and we still have like $19 million, I believe, in the cap. So who do you think is the biggest returning asset of the offseason?
Ooh, that's a tough one, especially because most of them are on the defensive side of the ball. Because, like you said, getting Leighton Vander Esch back was a huge plus for this defense because he was one of the leaders on that side of the ball. Even though he wasn't the most talented, he wasn't the most flashy, he was a solidified linebacker at the second level. And when he's played healthy and he stayed healthy throughout his career, he's been a productive linebacker. Now, is he playing at the Pro Bowl and the All-Pro level that you would love to see at that spot? Probably not, but he's a solidified guy as well. Man, Jonathan Hankins is a big one too, because
unsung.
You could see just exactly how much of an impact that he had on the defense as a whole, because before his arrival, they couldn't stop a nosebleed on the ground. They couldn't find a way to slow down anybody running the football. You and I could have probably had 200 yards and 3 touchdowns against that run defense at some point if you give us a couple days to stretch.
Yeah.
But I think whenever he got into the game, it took the defensive line and it allowed for the edge rushers to play free. It allowed for the linebackers to play free. But more importantly, it kept the line of scrimmage stationary because he wasn't getting pushed back. There weren't times where he was really pushing it forward and he was really winning his battles all the way through, but he was standing his ground. And that's all you need with a guy like that, a big, beefy jar of dirt in the middle, and just let him take up space and let him really kind of keep that line of scrimmage the same way. So I really do like the fact that Hankins is back, and I think that's probably the number one returning aspect for this team because it allows everybody else to play better.
Yeah, and for Vander Esch, I think Vander Esch played his best football like the last 3 games, including the playoffs. I think he had over 20 tackles in the 2 playoff games. So for him to come out and play at his best when it mattered makes me really confident. If we could keep him healthy, he seems to be the type of guy who he knows when to step up. And he knows, he's got some injury history, but I'm interested to see how Damone Clark looks this year. I'm interested to see if he develops. And we have, in the chat, Ultra Cowboy mentioned they need to draft a linebacker, and there's a few linebackers, but you mentioned Dorian Williams. It seems like there's a lot of linebackers with speed, but that lack ideal size. And Drew Sanders is not as short as a guy like Dorian Williams or Owen Popo from Auburn. He's a little taller, but he's also he's a lean guy, So there's size. The linebacker class is definitely different. I don't think there's Campbell's a stud. But I don't think there's Trenton Simpson. Maybe he's I have him as my linebacker 1.
Okay.
Just because I think he could do it all. I think Campbell can fill. I think Simpson's the sideline guy. And then Sanders is the tweener. He can go sideline to sideline, but I don't think he's as physical as Simpson in space, but he's better off the edge. So it's really, it comes down to what you're looking for. But before we get into draft prospects, we have acquisitions we've already made. All right. Stephon Gilmore, Brandon Cooks, Ronald Jones. And Ronald Jones, it's interesting that I just mentioned him just because, he was an acquisition outside. It's funny that would usually be when we talked earlier in the show, you'd wait till week 2. Ronald Jones, he was highly sought after coming into the draft, kind of fizzled out, right? That's the type of guy the Cowboys bring in after their rookie contract is over. They bring those guys in and they see if it works out. But I think Stephon Gilmore kind of reminds me in my brain, the last time we made a move like this for a corner, it wasn't a trade, it was a signing. It was Brandon Carr. Big deal. was big deal, lots of money. And I know Stephon Gilmore doesn't fill that. We're paying him. I think we have him for 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. Brandon Carr, we brought in a lot more. He had a lot more time on the contract, and we gave him a lot of money. But I don't know if the team was as developed around him. Stephon Gilmore gets to come in, and he gets to be the 2 alongside Trayvon Diggs. So he is the highly touted, aging veteran, but he doesn't have to be the anchor at corner. Yep. He gets to be the number 2. And Jerron Bland and even Mukuamu, if he comes in, he looked like he was playing corner decently. So we brought in a few dudes. Who do you think is going to have the biggest impact on this roster this coming season?
I think it'll be Gilmore specifically, at least to start anyways, because I agree with you completely. Every team he's been on, and he's been on a couple teams lately. I mean, Carolina, of course, he started with New England. He worked his way to Indianapolis. He's not only had to be corner 1, he's had to be corner 1+. He's had to be a leader of the defense. He's had to come in and be a playmaker. That's what he's expected to do, right? Well, like you said, he's the number 2 corner, and he might be the number 4 playmaker on the defense behind Trayvon Diggs, Micah Parsons. Even Jerron Bland had his 5 interceptions last year too. So there are multiple playmakers on this defense to where you don't have to come in and automatically be a game changer. Instead, it locks down the side of the field that you've been worried about, because Trayvon Diggs had a great year last year. Even though he didn't have an 11 interception season, right, he had his best season as a pro by far, because he was able to lock down number 1 receivers. He was able to take away a corner of the field or a third of the field. And now you get that on the other side with Stephon Gilmore. Doesn't need to have 11 interceptions. He doesn't even need to have 5 if you want to compare him to Jerron Bland. He just needs to lock down in coverage, and that's what he's really good at. Plus, he's willing to play in the run too, and I think that's something that was lacking last year with the secondary, and I think that's part of the way that they're coached. And you got to step up and you got to make a play in the run game. Gilmore is willing to do that, and he's a competitor too. So he helps some of these young corners. You got to think about it too. Trayvon Diggs was drafted in 2020. This is going into year number 4 for him. This isn't necessarily an aging veteran, a guy who's been around the game for decades. He's still a young player for the most part. So how do you get him to the next level, where not only Trayvon Diggs is in the conversation as an all-pro, but he's in the conversation as a defensive player of the year, which is what Stephon Gilmore was during his peak in the NFL. So I think he's going to be the biggest impact. I don't want to discount what Brandon Cooks can do, because, like I said, I think it opens up Michael Gallup's role a little bit better. And I think it helps these tight ends. You mentioned Peyton Hendershot earlier. He's your take the top off tight end. But Jake Ferguson is still a guy who can come in and do a little bit of everything as well. And I think if you have another guy who can play in the slot, can play outside, can do a little bit of both, like Cooks can, he's interchangeable with the Gallups and the Lambs and these tight ends, to where it really opens up your possibility on the underneath game and the yards after the catch ability too. Yeah, definitely. And you had mentioned Gilmore, coming in and helping Trayvon Diggs. It kind of reminds me of the Cowboys bringing in Jason Peters. And I know Tyler was a rookie last year, but Gilmore, you had mentioned him being interested in involving himself in the run game. Trayvon Diggs can see a guy who won Defensive Player of the Year, see how he goes about his business, and he gets to make this decision on his own. He's a grown man. Yeah. He could see him and make the decision. I want to do what he did, and I want to get the results that he got. Right? You learn from others. That's smart people do that. You see what greats do, and you follow them, man. So it'll be a lot of fun. Go ahead. I was just going to say, adding on to that, it takes me back, because you're right. Trayvon Diggs is not a rookie like Tyler Smith was a rookie when he was learning from Jason Peters. Trayvon Diggs has been there, done that now. He's had a couple All-Pros. He's had the season that he did in 21, and he followed it up with a great season last year. But it's that extra step. It's that extra level, because he's already playing at a high level. How do you take it above? And there's only a small amount of guys that can coach that. Al Harris specifically, I remember during training camp in 2020 when everything was shut down and we were at the Star and we were watching from afar. I was literally sitting in a suite at the Star from 100 yards away with my binoculars, and that's where the media was allowed to watch practice. And I remember every time that Trayvon Diggs had a play, good or bad, the first person he talked to was Al Harris. Al Harris was in his ear the entire time. There was so much mentorship. There was so much advice being thrown at him, and he was able to take it and run with it every single time. I expect the same thing with Stephon Gilmore, maybe not every single play, but Gilmore is one of those guys that can push that extra step. He can get that extra 10% out of a guy who's already filled out 90% of what most people ever do in a career. Stephon Gilmore's got that extra 10. He's going to be able to push that a little bit longer and a little bit better for Trayvon Diggs while also playing alongside him. That's a different aspect to it as well, because then you go to the sideline. Not only are you hearing from your coach and you're hearing things of what could be better from your coach, you're talking to your teammate too. And it creates a bond, I think, that both of those guys are going to really benefit from.
Yeah. And I think what it comes down to is that level, that what Diggs is missing. Like we live in a social media driven world. We live in a world where NFL Network, ESPN, for the most part, it's shock. We're going to say controversial things. And Trayvon Diggs is living in a world where, though he is playing at an elite level, there is doubt. And what he wants to do, I assume, is take a step to a level where there is no doubt.
Sure.
And in order to get to that level where there is no doubt and no one can say he's not that guy, he's got to do what Gilmore did, right? Because he's done it all else. But you want to make sure that nobody can say anything. You know, people with with an egg as an icon on Twitter can't say he's not one of the top 3 corners in the league. And in order to do that, there's a step he's got to take. But let's talk about some NFL draft prospects. All right. Okay. So we know Cowboys last year franchised Tony Pollard. They pick up Jake Ferguson. They got Peyton Hendershot. They let Dalton Schultz go. This year they franchised Tony Pollard. So maybe they'll draft a running back. Who is your favorite running back outside of the first round? Right. So let's say let's say you can't say Bijan, you can't say Gibbs.
Okay.
So I don't think
2 first round grades. So you nailed it.
I don't think Gibbs goes in the first round. He could, but let's just say those are the 2.
Sure.
Outside of there, who is your favorite?
Zach Charbonnet, UCLA. I think, and I agree with you. I don't think Gibbs goes in the first round. I think he's a first round caliber player, but that goes back to the positional value of a running back and just how scarce teams or just how reluctant teams are to really take that step and really to draft somebody early. But I really like Zach Charbonnet. I have a second round grade on him. If he's available at 58 because of the same thing I just mentioned with positional value, I don't know if I'd be shocked because you don't get the benefit of maybe snagging a 5th-year option on the guy. The way that I had him scouted here, I mean, powerful runner, tough to bring down even when he gets time to ramp up. He runs very tall. He's only 6 foot. He was listed at 6'2" throughout his playing career at UCLA, but at the combine, he came in at 6 foot, which I think actually helps him a little bit because he does. He runs straight up. He runs very tall. But after an underwhelming couple of years at Michigan, he went to the West Coast and he just was phenomenal. He was an absolute bell cow for UCLA, had 203 carries in his first season. He holds his frame well. He moves really good. He has a long time, or he's very long, so it takes him some time to get going. But when he does, he's as tough as anybody in the country to take down. I really like him. A couple other names I think to keep an eye on. I really like Devin Achane. I had a second round grade on him too. And then third round grades on a trio of backs, actually 4 backs. Tajay Spears, who's the number 1 of those third round grades. Tank Bigsby out of Auburn, Eric Gray out of Oklahoma, and then Kenny McIntosh from Georgia. Those were my 4 third round grades that I have. This is, and you mentioned linebacker earlier. Linebacker, I don't think it's a great class. Wide receiver, I think it's top heavy, but I don't think it's a great class outside of the top 4 or 5 wide receivers. But tight end and running back, they are abundant. You can
corner too, man.
Corner, absolutely. I think corner is actually the best. This is the best corner class I've scouted to this point. I think this is a really, really good corner class. But on the offensive side of the ball, tight end and running back are so abundant that you could get them in the first round and you could be happy. You can go get a Dalton Kincaid out of Utah as a tight end. You can go get a Bijan Robinson out of Texas, and you're going to be A-okay. but you could also wait until the 3rd round or the 4th round and get a Sam Laporta out of Iowa, or get a Tajay Spears or a Tank Bigsby out of Auburn, and I guess Tulane before that. But there's so many different players that are available through the course of the weekend in all of those positions. It goes back to what you said earlier. I don't have a read. I really don't. I don't know where they're thinking. I think they're going offensive early. They're going to take an offensive player, probably a skill player or an interior offensive lineman. But for the most part, you can't really dial it in on who they want until that day comes, until you have 25 picks already in the book and you get to 26 and you kind of finally know what the board looks like.
This is a great year to move back, but unfortunately, there's only 31 picks in the first round because the Dolphins forfeited their first. So how far can we move back from 26? And if you move into the second round, you're losing that 5th-year option. So it's not as easy as it's easier said than done, right? But it would be a great year to move back a little bit, because also John Michael Schmitz, center guard. He's another guy who I think he'd come in and he would start right away and he would give you some flexibility. But, on the running back aspect, I loved a lot of the names. I don't think I like Zach Evans as well. Israel Abonaconda, who just had his Pittsburgh Pro Day.
Really good.
I was on Abonaconda when I was watching my Jordan Addison film. And I went back and I watched some of his Pittsburgh film. And when I watch a player and somebody else stands out to me while I'm watching that player, I always take note. And then I go down that rabbit hole. I start watching that film. Abonaconda, when I watched when I watched Addison, I was like, this guy, he's a dude. I think he's got the frame to be a 3-down running back. He's super explosive. His stop-start. And I don't think the capital would be there. I don't think it'd be too high. Another guy that I think would fit, opposite Tony Pollard is Chris Rodriguez. Another guy I don't think it would be, too expensive. But coming out of Kentucky, he's just a hammer. And I think he would fill that role where he's not a guy I would necessarily think we could go the Dalton Schultz route and let Pollard go. I think he'd be a guy you'd want to play, 60-40, like Pollard 60, Rodriguez 40.
Yeah, so on the 3 guys you just mentioned, Zach Evans out of Ole Miss, I have a 4th-round grade on him. I actually know Zach pretty well because he grew up in Houston. I got to see him 2 times in a state championship game that I called when Galena Park North Shore played Duncanville.
Hell yeah!
And he had some troubles. We'll say that toward the back half of his high school career, and it continued into the collegiate side of things. But he has this work ethic that's just unbelievable. He really does. If he can stay on the field and he can stay out of trouble, I think he's going to be an incredible talent. But some of the off the field stuff just kind of knocked him a little bit for me. Israel Abonaconda, like you said, out of Pitt, man, you talk about production. He had 20 rushing touchdowns last year, and he was averaging 164 yards all-purpose per game. I mean, he was first in rushing touchdowns. He was second in all-purpose yards. And you talk about a big play threat. I compared him to C.J. Spiller because I think he's very good laterally, and then he has that really, really quick acceleration.
Right.
You can punch into the hole. I watched him against Tennessee, Syracuse, and North Carolina, which all 3 of those teams, I watched it on purpose because they all have pretty decent front sevens. And I wanted to see the way that he navigated through traffic at the second level. And I thought he did a really good job of doing so. The one thing about Abonaconda that and it may actually mean he fits with the Cowboys better, is that he's not much of a factor in the passing game. He didn't really show up passing game wise. He wasn't utilized as a receiver. And in this day and age of the NFL, you have to be able to do both. So if he's not going to do that, you need somebody who does, which of course, with the Cowboys, you have Tony Pollard, and you're totally fine with that. I think there's a fun back and forth there too. And it's funny that you think he could be a fit with the Cowboys. In the draft magazine that of course is coming out this week, I nabbed him as a Cowboys fit for the position. I took a guy for every position. I took a guy outside of the top 10 ranked guys in the position, and I provided a full scouting report. And I said, here you go. Here's somebody that can fit with the Cowboys. And here's somebody that I think is outside of the top 10, but I think he's under the radar. And Abonaconda was my running back Cowboys fit because I think he does fit well with Tony Pollard in the way that they want to run this defense, this offense throughout the season.
Man, I like it. And that's the reason why Charbonnet is such a good, because he could,
Yeah.
he's not as explosive as Pollard, but he could catch the ball. My comp for Charbonnet is James Conner. And some people
Ooh, that was
I've
mine.
heard,
Yeah.
get out of here.
Yeah, no, I'm not even kidding. I'm looking at it right now. James Conner. It's in the magazine too. So if you want to test me,
And if you're listening at home,
yeah.
I did not know Kyle had Abonaconda because I don't have the magazine. It's not out yet. And I didn't know James Conner was his comp because it's not out
That means
yet.
you're doing your work. That's what it is. That means you're doing your scouting.
People forget, man, that's great. I'm like buzzing right now. That's awesome. But people forget how good James Conner was before he got sick at Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Like James Conner isn't a knock. That is like, dude was productive. And then, I had somebody tell me, oh, they're different players. Charbonnet's so much faster. Charbonnet, he's a 4.5 guy, which is compared to humans like us. That's fast as hell, but he's not, he's not a twitched up guy. When he catches the ball, it's not explosive reactions. It's smooth hands, Go
was
ahead.
James Conner? I mean, that was, he
was like 4.6. He was 4.6.
Yeah. Okay.
Which
Yeah.
is,
I mean, you're 0.1.
But
Yeah,
that's 2 years
4,
removed
6,
from. That's 2 years removed from being treated for cancer.
Right? Yeah.
So, and then now look at him, dude. Arizona's a train wreck, and the dude had like 20 touchdowns in the NFL. So, that's awesome, man. I'm excited about that. So, I was going to ask next if you think the Cowboys have tipped their hand for the first round, but you've already mentioned, it's you think it's offense, basically.
I think it's offense, and I don't think if there was any sort of tipping of the hand, it was what Jerry said about Terrence Steele. It was what came out last week about what he said about Terrence Steele being the swing tackle.
Weird.
Tyler Smith. One, I think there's part of it that I understand. Part of it I do. There's other parts of it that it just doesn't add up to me, and it makes me think that that he's throwing a smokescreen. But it also might show his hand a little bit, because if you're going to make Terrence Steele the swing tackle, that means you're going to take an offensive lineman, right? I mean, that
guard's open.
Take a guard either in the first round or the second round. And if you're going to get Steve Avila or Torrance in the second round, if they fall out of the first, you're going to have to trade up to go get them in order to do so, which I don't think I would put past this team. If they felt like one of these guys was good enough, they could package their third and their second and their fourth, or their second and their fifth, and go up to the mid 30s and go get Avila if they really like that. But I just don't know if that's going to happen right now. Of course, you can't predict any of that happening. But if there was any sort of tipping in a hand, that would have been probably the indicator.
I mocked for the Cowboys in a mock we did on our website, titles.com. And I actually took Avila in the first and traded up in the second for Will McDonald. Because I think Dan Quinn is infatuated with him, which would be interesting to draft Sam Williams and then draft Will McDonald. Not saying just two defensive ends that Dan Quinn is in love with, like back-to-back years. It would seem a little bit like overkill, but you know what? Like, you need to fill a role. You keep swinging until you hit the ball. But I mean, I do think I agree with you. I think it's offense, and it'll be very interesting to see where they go on the offense. Now, let's see here. Okay. If the Cowboys had, so Campy, my Australian friend, he put this question in here. If the Cowboys had the first overall pick this year, who do you think they would take? So, and they could take anybody in this class. Like, so we're living in fantasy land right now.
Yeah.
Who do you think they would take?
Wow. Who do you think they would take? Not who I would take.
Yeah. Well, I mean, either way, man. I'll give you. You can answer it however you take that question. You do whatever you want with it.
Man, because I mean, the first things first is you would look at the quarterbacks, right? I mean, you would have to. That's just how it is in the NFL. And if you have two quarterbacks, you make it work. Look at what San Francisco did. I mean, San Francisco was a good enough team under Jimmy Garoppolo to go to the Super Bowl. And then a couple years later, they were in the top 5, and they kept Jimmy Garoppolo, but they drafted Trey Lance. And so I would probably still look at the quarterbacks. I would look at CJ Stroud. And that's not a knock against Dak. That's just the fact of the matter of picking first overall. The number one non-quarterback that's on my board is Will Anderson out of Alabama. And I think he would be phenomenal for this defense. Man. So I'll I'll say I think they would pick Will Anderson. I don't think they would really look at the quarterbacks. I would
next year. If it was next year, I think with Caleb Williams, I think they'd have to.
Sure. Caleb Williams might be a generational type of player. He may be the next Patrick Mahomes. Who knows? But everybody's trying to find that with anybody. But and CJ Stroud's a big time player too. So is Bryce Young. Anthony Richardson, of course, has had some buzz. I really like Hendon Hooker. I think Hendon Hooker is a developmental quarterback that will have a long career in the NFL. Will Levis there too. I do like Will Levis. I think this is a solid quarterback group. It's much better than the one that we had last year. I don't think it's as good as the Trevor Lawrence group. But for the most part, this is a good quarterback class. I would still do my homework, but I think the Cowboys would do they would take Will Anderson overall, and they would make it work from there.
All right, I got 2 more questions for you, and then we could wrap this thing up. One of them, this isn't going to be the most fun of the 2 questions, but this is a question that needs to be asked. Well, I mean, you're gonna hear it, and you're gonna be like, yeah, we need to add. What are we doing with kicker? Like, what are we doing with kicker? Like, we can't, man. I've lost years of my life last year in the playoffs with Maher. Maher, not for nothing, man. Caps off to him how he did in the regular season, coming in and like getting it done. Nobody expected anything, but then he completely. It was almost like in Cinderella. Midnight clock struck midnight, and the coach turned back into a pumpkin, and this guy was shanking every single extra point. Is there a kicker to draft? Robbie Gould, is that a possibility? What are we doing?
I don't think you're going to see a drafted kicker. Even last year, when we brought up the conversation of Cade York when he was coming out of LSU, and then Cameron Dicker from Texas, there were possibilities there. They have covered their bases enough, I think, from a roster standpoint, that if they get to the 5th, 6th, 7th round and they have some picks left over and they don't have any traded guys that they want to go and try and hunt those traits, I think they could maybe take a kicker. I just don't know of any that are going to really be impressive enough to make that move. Cade York was a draftable prospect. Cameron Dicker was a draftable prospect. I don't even know if Dicker even went drafted. I can't remember right off the top.
But I went in the 7th. I believe he went in the 7th.
And then I think he got cut, right? And he ended up with the Rams.
Yeah. Let me check.
Either way, I think there's a possibility that you're going to try and maybe either trade for a guy or you sign a veteran and try and bring him in, because you haven't had success at that position since, at least consistent success, since Dan Bailey left. And after Dan Bailey left, you had some guys kind of rotate through. Brad Maher probably had the best regular season out of any of those guys. So I think if they don't draft the guy, he will at least get a chance. But will he continue to be the guy? I think that's what's still left to be said.
I just can't see Jerry Jones. I don't know Jerry Jones, but I love Jerry Jones. And he's getting older, man. And I can't see him being comfortable with that.
I don't think he is. I don't think anybody's comfortable with it, even if that is the move.
Right. Like, I don't know, man. And Dicker wasn't drafted. He was a priority free agent after the draft. So you are correct. All right. The last question I'm going to ask you, we all have our guys in the draft process. 2 of mine, I love Julius Brents, Kansas State. I think that guy, so gifted, and what he doesn't do well. To me, I've coached defensive backs at high school level, coach wide receivers at high school level. What he doesn't do well is always at the end of the route, how he adjusts to the ball. And sometimes he panics and he looks for the ball, or he grabs the receiver instead of keying the eyes, keying the hands. These are all things that are just discipline and poise. He's a pocket guy. He's in your pocket. So I love Brents. I think he'd fit in very well with the Cowboys. Another guy I love is Josh Downs, North Carolina. My comp for him is Cole Beasley with a booster pack. Like you put a jet pack on Cole. This dude, 3rd down situations, red zone situations, all he does is create giant windows for the quarterback to put the ball in. He's tough. He's tenacious. So those are 2 guys. I would love if one of them ends up on the Cowboys. Who are some of your players that if they end up in Dallas, like you'd get their jersey? You're going to go down the street to the player shop and get his jersey. Who's it going to be?
You're gonna laugh at me, by the way, whenever I say Josh Downs comp, and I had it down as Cole Beasley.
Dude,
So
come on,
yeah,
get it out of my head.
I'm just saying, yeah, I'm copying your work over here somehow.
You're gonna think I'm like I'm some sort of troll who's stealing your notes. Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say, did you hack my draft spreadsheet? Like, did you hack my Google Drive? What's going on here?
The worst thing you did was you told people you were going to be out of town for your bachelor party. I took it as an opportunity to sneak in, and it was like Ocean's 11. I dove in and I hacked your computer for sure.
Oh man, well, you did a great job, and you hacked the right guy's computer. Let's just say it that way. You have good taste. Man, that's tough because I love some of these wide receivers at the top of the draft, like Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think he's a phenomenal talent. I love watching him in high school at Rockwall. Had him a couple times back whenever I was still covering a lot of high school sports. The most part, I do love Bijan Robinson. I think he's a top 10 player in the draft, and it's not even close. Some of these other guys that are a little bit further down the list, I like Luke Weipler out of Ohio State quite a bit. He's a center, strong, sturdy center, somebody that I think would be a starter right away. Everybody loves Cody Mauk. You talk about a fit with this team specifically, and it happened last year right around the combine. I started hearing the name Tyler Smith. That was the first time I heard Tyler Smith from Tulsa. Keep an eye on Tyler Smith from Tulsa. And I heard it at the combine a couple times. If I had to compare one name to Tyler's that I heard at the combine for the first time, and I heard it a couple times, was Mozzie Smith from Michigan. That might be one of those mid-round guys.
Noted.
Yeah, that at least there's been some conversation. There's been some interest there. And I think he's a good player. I think he's a great fit. I think he's Jonathan Hankins, but as a rookie. I think he'll play at Jonathan Hankins' level right now as a rookie. He's the best run defender in college football last year. He's not going to rush the passer. He's not going to provide any sacks. And I think there's a big knock to his game is his lateral ability and the fact that he's probably only going to be a two-down player. But if you can put him in a strength and conditioning program in the NFL, I have confidence that he could be more than just a two-down player. And I think this team probably thinks the same way as well. So I wouldn't necessarily say he's like a pet cat or he's like my guy, but that's definitely somebody to keep an eye on. And then I mentioned it earlier. I love this corner class, man. There's 3 corners that I legitimately have in the top 13 or 14 players. Christian Gonzalez from Oregon's my top guy. Right after him is Joey Porter Jr. from Penn State, and then Devin Witherspoon from Illinois. I think all 3 of those guys are starters. I think all 3 of those guys can be Pro Bowlers at some point in their career, if not even quicker than that. I think this is a really, really talented corner class that we're going to get to see come into the league this year. And I think it's about time we've seen some good corners come into the league too, because they've had some duds over the last couple of years. Trayvon Diggs was the best one out of that 2020 class. Cowboys were lucky enough to snag him.
Yeah, and in the second round, I actually have Deonte Banks one spot ahead of Witherspoon. I love Banks, man. I think he's going to be very, very good. And Witherspoon I like a lot.
Yeah.
So it's really just like hairs I'm splitting.
Yeah. Let me tell you one thing about Banks, and I agree with you. His tape impressed me more than Witherspoon. From what I heard after the combine, apparently he didn't interview very well. I don't think
really? That's interesting.
I don't think that's a knock on him as a person and his study and his mentality. I think if anything, he's coming out of a system where he didn't have to do a whole lot. They made it easy on him throughout his collegiate career. And I think it's going to be a little bit of a transition. I think he's really, really good. I still put a first-round grade on him. He's number 20 in my big board overall. He's a very talented player. But if there was one knock to him, Witherspoon is very sharp. He's got a high football IQ. I think Banks can get there. He's just going to have to take a little bit of a step forward in that area.
Man, hell yeah. This has been absolutely incredible. I appreciate your time, man. Last year we were doing this. You were you were on site in California. You were
Yeah.
like, I got the background tour. Like you guys were in the van, then you guys were so I'm gonna have to, everybody was like calling me up after that. That was awesome. So I'm gonna have to try to link up with you again around training camp. And we're gonna have to same thing.
I'm just in my apartment right now, so I mean, I can give you the tour. It's not going to impress anybody, I promise you. But
I'm sure your old lady would love that.
Yeah, she's over here. She's shaking her head. She's like, no, don't do that, don't do that. But yeah, man, it's been a lot of fun, and I saw Ultra Cowboy in this group message or in this comment right here. It says, Kyle, why don't you guys broadcast live at the NFL draft? Well, that's because everything happens at the Star. That's because everything's in Frisco. We're on site. That's where we hear the information. That's where we talk to the scouting department. That's where we talk to the front office. That's why we're wall-to-wall coverage, and we're excited to do it again this year. Can't wait.
Brought to you by Miller Lite, right?
Yeah, Miller Lite, baby. It's Miller time. Yeah, we'll go crack a couple cold ones and plop down and watch some of the draft show, because we're going to have some really good coverage over the wall-to-wall coverage all weekend long. Should be a blast. And then, like you said, then it's getting close. We're counting down the days to Oxnard again and getting back out there to the West Coast.
Hell yeah. And hopefully, we'll link up with you again when you're in Oxnard. Hopefully next year, maybe you'll be at the Senior Bowl. We could take a trip to the Waffle House. That's always, good when you're in Mobile, Alabama, but we'll figure that out, man. So I appreciate your time. Anybody listening at home, I appreciate you for checking this out. Go check out Kyle on Twitter at Kyle_Youmans. And if you're not familiar with his work yet and you like the Cowboys and you're watching this show, I'm surprised. But if you're not, check out Talkin Cowboys, check out the draft show, check out anything. And apparently, he's got some articles coming up, some player profiles you want to check out. Check out the magazine. What is the name of the draft magazine specifically? So
Star Magazine. Just look up Star Magazine Draft Guide, and it'll pop up pretty soon. I believe it should be available tomorrow. At least that's what I've been told, and if nothing has changed.
I'm ordering a set, and then you'll be able to find my player comps in that magazine.
All of them, all 132.
That's it. All right, Kyle, I'm going to let you go, man. Everybody listening at home, check us out. I'll see you all next Sunday, Tuesday night. We're talking Toilets and Titles, Dynasty Talk. Thursday night's on the clock. We will catch you all later on.